Welcome to a Prevent Connect podcast, where we explore the prevention of violence against women. This is a project of the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault.
Hi, good morning, everybody. What an incredible plenary start to this conference, eh? Shout out to Tarana and Annabella. Great speeches this morning, and the music was fantastic, right? So my name is Mary Haviland. I'm the Executive Director of the New York City Alliance Against Sexual Assault. I started gender-based violence work in 1978 as a humble paralegal in Brooklyn, New York. And I am now the Executive Director of the Alliance. I'm very proud to be so. I want to introduce my two co-speakers. In fact, I want to introduce these two staff people because these two staff people are really the people who have grown and nurtured and watered every day Project DOT. Project DOT stands for Dream, Own, Tell. And it's our youth program at the Alliance that we have been running for almost 3 years now, I think. So let me first introduce Shashwati Sarkar, who is standing right here. She is our Director of Finance and Program Development at the Alliance. And this program is her birth child and has been working on it since its inception. She came to us from Manavie, which is a New Jersey program for women and people of the South Asian community. And she worked for 6 years doing technical assistance and traveling around the country on OVW funded training technical assistance grants. And I'd also like to introduce Christina Ortiz, who is standing next to her. Christina came to the Alliance almost a couple years ago. She has a deep history in working with the homeless and in supportive housing as a health and wellness educator. And she is now in charge of our regional prevention. We have a sexual assault prevention center that we run in New York City in collaboration with 4 other rape crisis centers. This Project DOT is centered in that regional center. What I want to do is just briefly introduce that we are going to be doing a presentation. The 3 of us are going to be switching off for the presentation. We are going to present the model. We hope to share sort of top-level strategies and contribute to the prevention discussion throughout our presentation. We're going to ask you to participate in a couple of exercises, and we're going to do a short piece introducing people to the world of evidence for efficacy, evidence-based, evidence-informed, that whole sort of area of research around prevention programs. So let me just start by asking you to put your phones on silent, if you could, so they don't ring. And you are free to ask questions as we move through the presentation. We are going to be compiling some supplemental information to this presentation, so if you would like to sign up for that, use the sign-up sheet on the table that has our logo at the top, and be sure to give us your email address, okay? I'm now going to turn over the program to Christina.
Okay, so in the middle of each of your tables, there's a piece of paper that is turned over. So if somebody on your table can take it, flip it over. We're gonna do a little exercise that we do with our youth as an icebreaker, and they really, really love it. So you have 45 seconds to come up with as many 4-letter words for sex as you can, starting with the letter A, and the team who has the most will get a little prize from us, okay? A through Z, yeah. Every table should have a piece of paper, okay? Hold on, don't cheat. Hold on, don't cheat. Okay, ready, set, go. Anything that has to do with sex, anything you could think of. actions, body parts, words, slang, vulgar. And you do not have to go in order. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Put your pens down, please. Did any table get more than 20? More than 20 words? No, in any order. More than 20? More than 15? More than 13? Okay. Can you read them off?
We all said these, so.
This is just a disclaimer that the words may be inappropriate. All right, so A, we have anal. B, bang. C, care. D is dick. E, eggs. F, fuck. Excuse my language once again. H is hard. K, kind. L is love. M, we said make. O, oral. P, play. R, rock. And S is suck/sexy.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. How did it feel to do that as a group? Awkward, competitive, yeah. Focus, anything else? Why was it awkward? Yeah. Yeah, huh? So, not knowing people, not saying the words, you didn't know half of them. Any other reasons it was awkward? Yeah, yeah. Not sure if it was appropriate. Can you give me an example of one? Did you choose a word that you felt wasn't appropriate? In the back? No? Okay. Yeah. So we do this activity, not only is it fun for our youth, it gets into the conversation of communication, right? A word, just like you said, may mean that to somebody else, but it may not mean the same thing to your partner. And so we use that as a way to talk to them about how it's important to be on the same page with your partner. And it's important to know that the language that you're using is acceptable for your partner. That's a good one. It wasn't a 4-letter word, and I never, but there's a new term that no longer means, like, thought is out. And it's, if I can remember, I will tell you, but it's a new word because they said thought is no longer in. It's like, I'm gonna remember and I'm gonna tell you, I promise. I have to think about it for a second, yes. 13 to 21.
And we'll get into some of the description of the model as we go through. So you should have a really good idea of the model by the end of the workshop. I forgot to ask, could I see by a show of hands how many people are currently implementing a youth program in the room? Oh my gosh, lots of you. Wow. Okay, great. And are there people here who are looking to start a youth program? Okay. And of those who raised your hands, how many of you are using a curriculum or are you using your own program? So let me ask first if you're using a curriculum of some kind. Oh, so a lot fewer. And how many are using your own, what they're calling sort of homegrown? Oh, good. Okay, so there's a good number of that too. Great. Great. I'm gonna give a little bit of background about how we came up with this program. We at the Alliance have done other programs for youth in our past. We did a photo project with youth. We did a program called Pause Button, which was to look at video games and sexual violence in video games. And we had done some work with youth in our history, and everybody here, I think, is aware of the risk that youth are at for sexual assault, and we wanted to have a direct impact on that. We also are an umbrella organization for our rape crisis centers in New York City, and every year we convene the rape crisis centers for a 3-hour meeting on what people believe the priorities are or the biggest obstacles are that survivors are facing in the city. And over again, the issue of youth and prevention desert communities where there was no prevention work or no talk of sexual assault in lots of communities in New York City. We also often talk about the media and the ways that it plays into a rape culture and a sexualization of youth. And so these themes were coming up over and over again. And it was out of those themes that the Alliance started to really think about. The other thing I should mention about the Alliance is we have been doing prevention work since 2007. We were one of the first programs in the state, for sure, to do prevention work in sexual assault. So these threads of work and thought came together. And we also thought that one of the ways that we could push back against the media was to look at campaigns. And so what we thought we wanted to do was to create youth-inspired campaigns that would reach deep into the diverse communities in New York City. I think you know that I think there's 130 languages spoken in New York City. Queens is the most diverse place in the United States in terms of the numbers, the populations there and the people who are foreign born. We have an amazingly diverse city that is just wonderful from the point of view of eating, speaking languages, and talking to people who come from different cultures. And we noticed that the campaigns that we saw in New York City coming from sort of government agencies, specifically on domestic violence. There had never been a campaign on sexual assault, but on domestic violence, that the campaigns were really homogenous and aimed visually and content-wise at the white populations in New York City. And we really wanted to do something different. And so what we did was we started out to create a campaign created by youth, and we ended up going much, much deeper, which is what you will see. And I will say and I'm going to turn it over to Shashoti next, I will say that we did do a lot of foundational work before we started this program. We did a needs assessment, we did community research, we looked at the communities that we were going to aim at. We looked at the youth risk behavior surveys and other kinds of data that was available before we launched our program. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Shashoti.
Thank you, Mary. Okay, I have to be honest, this is not my favorite tool. So I'll try to cheat a little bit, so bear with me. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our work in general, but before we go into that, I just want to do a quick temperature check. Thank you. I have Christina kind of hinting at me. So I try to do a quick temperature check in this room, because many of you kind of raised your hand and talked about the programs you're doing. If you want to shout out just a phrase or word, what do you think are some of the essential elements or the core components that you would think would make a young people's program successful? What are those maybe 2 or 3 things in your mind from your experience that always pops up? This is what it absolutely needs.
Empowerment focus.
Just ground rules and respect and trust.
We have been told that it has to be
interactive.
Interactive, okay.
Cultural relevancy.
Say what? Sorry, I didn't. Yes. Okay.
keeping it real.
Okay. Anybody else? I think I did see a hand raised at the back. Okay.
Self-care.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's true, because I think self-care, keeping it real, making sure that it's culturally appropriate and making sense to the young people that you're working with. Also kind of making sure that you're kind of grounded in a way that's positive is all core components that we found were meaningful for our program. So what I'm gonna do is talk a little bit about our program model, how we got to that model, what are some of the strategies we have used, some of the core components. And as we talk about that, I also, along the path, will share some of the lessons learned. And we learned some pretty hard lessons. It took us 4 years to get where we were. And we were like whining, crying, struggling, getting disappointed, being inspired by young people, and always reminded that we needed our young people were our center. And we had to go back to them. And that in and of itself was worth all the tears, the stressful, sleepless nights, and everything else. So I'm gonna share some of those stories, because I feel like in this room here, there's a lot of experience around running a youth program, but I wanted to share those like little pieces of experience that we gathered along the path. Now, before we go into that conversation, I want to encourage all of you to bring those experiences into the room. So if you feel like I'm talking through a slide and you have a point that you want to make, share something, just make sure that you raise your hand, and I'd like to welcome that conversation. So before we went into this conversation, something that we did was we were very clear about our goals. As a person of color, it was really important for me, and I'd be honest, I was a little fed up with all of the conversations that I was hearing. And one of the conversations that was starting to bug me a lot is anytime I would talk about Project DOT or the work I'm doing, and I would say, oh, I'm doing this work with communities that have been traditionally underserved, the first thing that I would see is a sigh of pity. Oh, you're doing such a great work. Like, they really need this stuff. There is so much taboo. People really need that. You're doing great work. So I really want to start the conversation by we are not going into different communities to fix people's problem. We are not that. We are not, providing people tools and solving people's problem. As a person of color from South Asian community, I would be extremely unimpressed if somebody came into my community and told me how to do my stuff. So with some of those recognition, we started the program, and we had very core belief. We made sure that our core beliefs were centered at all time, and the ones that you see up there are some of the core beliefs. So we agreed that sex is a taboo in most communities. Sexual violence is a problem in most communities, and the answer lies in the youth and how they choose to address that within their community. So we were very clear about some of those directions. Also, what we did not want to do is start with stereotypes and look at stereotypes within communities. Instead, we made a very forceful, conscious decision to think about what strengths lies within these communities. So for example, as a South Asian person, if you ask me what are some of the strengths and the points of struggle, I see as a community strength, there is a deep level community bonding within this community, close ties within family, strong community connection. Also, there is a lot of hierarchy, which is not so great within the community. Now, the way we try to run these groups is to make sure at every point, very consciously thinking, what about those strengths could I use to talk about sexual violence? What about those strengths would be most meaningful in this conversation? So those are some general principles. Also, we were very clear in our head what this program is and what it's not. We did not want to provide any one solution to people. So before we got there, as Mary was talking about it, people had, we looked at a bunch of curriculum, we looked at what's out there, and many of the curricula that are out there, for example, let's say bystander, how could you step in and be a good bystander within your community as a young person? There were these curricula that are talking of giving you specific advices around, oh, call the police, delegate, direct, distract. Well, calling the police, I don't know. Many of our communities would not do that in this climate, and also in otherwise, they would not do that. So when we took those curriculum and had conversation, communities were offended. They were offended because A, we were not trusting their expertise within their community, and we were using some cookie cutter formula to kind of make them like make a square peg fit in a round hole type situation. So people were very offended. So we wanted to make sure that we gave them the tools, but they created their own solution. Also, we were very mindful in the way we did the exercise that people were constantly thinking about what's going on now. We entered spaces with a very clear concept that I am here as a sexual violence expert, and you, as a young person, you're here as youth expert. I'm not a youth expert, and I'm willing to learn. And I have to say that so many of the things that you would hear today or in other spaces are things that you already know. It's not brand new stuff, right? But what I thought was brand new to me was to be able to learn to be humble and to be taught by young people. And to be able to kind of think based on, take directions and be able to think along those lines. These are not big, like complicated principles. These are basic things, but they held our program together. At times when we were confused, we didn't know which way to go, we turned to young people, and they really gave us some good directions. And you will hear around the time we talk about campaign, how they saved the day for us. So really, we also wanted to make sure that the conversations were based off of like the cultural space they came in for. So we did a whole host of exercise that really got people in that mode. So I'll use an example. So we have this example around healthy relationship. We talk about healthy relationship. And in that exercise, what we do is that we have young people identify what are their influencers, what are the influencers in their lives. We kind of talked to them, and this was in the early phases, and they said, look, the top influencers for us are media. That's where we get a lot of this stuff. Also, there is our parents, caregivers, families. They're talking to us about relationship, healthy or not, and our friends. In school, in neighborhood, they're talking to us about that stuff. So the way we made sure that we're at every point, we're drawing experience from them and turning that into a learning experience is by asking them to kind of identify. So now that you have these three major influencers, if you could identify like what are some good advice that you got from them, and what are some not so great advice you got from them. And they did some phenomenal work. I wanted to share that with you when I talk about the curriculum. But what was great was that, it gave them a level of recognition that there are good advices and there are not so great advices. So they got to do a little bit of that. But it came with a skills building. Like, we all walk through our lives knowing that there would be advices. Some of them are great, some of them are not. And sometimes we just have to stand up to the not so great advice. So we really had that conversation around, yes, you would get all these advices and knowing what are great and what are not around relationship, around dating choices, around sexual relationship, but also knowing that you be able to limit some of those conversations in a way that's meaningful to you. So that really helped people be grounded in a lot of different ways. Also, I don't think we need to go in there. All of you are on the same page here. School-based traditional sex ed programs. Yeah, so it's a pretty much of a departure from that. We are not that. In terms of strategies, now these are some of the ground rules, you could say. Something that we learned early on is that we had to have focus. We could not be here, there, everywhere. We needed to know what we should do. So we had a couple of core strategies. We were a grassroots youth sexual violence prevention program, and we decided that we are going to be youth-driven at all time, which meant when it came time for some decision making to figure out if what we have here is working or not, we were going to ask them. We also decided that we are not going to tell people what not to do. Rather, we would focus on what to do or encourage what they're also already doing, which meant moving away from like a sexual violence prevention framework to a healthy relationship framework. And what does that mean? We also decided that instead of doing a whole host of topics, we're going to look at 3 core issues. We are going to look at healthy relationship, consent, and bystander, and really drill down and look at what would it mean. Let's say, as a South Asian person, if I'm running a group, what would it mean as a young person from the South Asian community to practice all 3 of those in a healthy, positive way that leverages community strength? So, and again, the reason I'm giving you all these structure is because with each group, some of those information and knowledge are generated by the group. I'm not bringing anything to the table beyond my knowledge of sexual violence. I could tell them what consent is, what's not, but they're really coming up with those practical solutions. Also, in order to make sure that we are doing it right, I cannot speak beyond any other community than my own, and it's inappropriate to do so without really knowing any of that. So we made sure that for each of the community groups, we partnered with a community agency that were directly serving those agencies, directly serving those communities, because we brought the knowledge, but they brought the nuances and kind of translated that information for them. If for some reason you don't have a partner to kind of collaborate with you, which happened last iteration when we were running a group with the Southeast Asian population, we made sure to go back and run the curriculum through them, make sure they sat with us, gave us some instructions around things to keep in mind based on what we are presenting. And then at any point when we did not know what it meant, we went back to them and asked for questions. So we were using them as a data point to make sure we were kind of running through it. Finally, the larger piece was that at every point, remembering that these communities that we chose to work with, the reason we chose to work with them is not because they need it so badly, but because nobody else is working with them. We we looked through everything to see what's out there. We found nothing, very disappointing. So we wanted to offer them a program that would take the history of their resilience. Many of these communities have history of fighting injustices, so really leveraging that as a way to think about it. So these are some of the communities we have worked with so far, and then starting fall, we are looking at a couple different communities. Okay. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the program model. So the program model has clear components. It is a community level strategy that has 3 core components. We have curriculum, campaign, and community mobilization. We really thought about this program from the perspective of the 9 principles of prevention that Mary is going to talk about, but our core objective is to make sure that it is multi-component, it has it's appropriate in different settings. So you're out in the community, you're out in social media space, you're out in after-school setting when we do the curriculum, and it's comprehensive. It's more than one session. And we made some conscious decision around not doing a lot of one and done type training. So when we got those offers, we would make sure we would assess if those one and done type trainings were an outreach opportunity, or were they really checking a box during Sexual Assault Awareness Month. So we were very strategic where we wanted to invest our energy. And for all the right reason, we were very small at that point. We wanted to use our capacity in a way that's most meaningful, even if it's to 2 people. So we were very, very mindful around that. And then the timeline, it was an 18 weeks, it's an 18 weeks program, 2 hours per week. However, the 18 weeks is kind of a interesting piece. It's actually 16, and we could also do it in 14, but we like to keep those extra weeks to ourselves because that's how we are advertising to our youth, and sometimes for a snow day or whatever reason, we lose a day or 2. So when you're thinking about these programs and how you're advertising it, think about that. Because we have had young people come back and tell us that there is not enough, they have been coming to us and telling us that, oh, you said 16, but then there was a snow day, but it's still going to be 16. We just say 18. So you miss it, there's a snow day, we're still good. Yeah. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the program component. I know that I have until 11:30, so I wanted to do a quick time check in terms of how much time I have. Okay.
No, wait, it's 11:17.
Okay. 13 minutes. Thank you. Great. So, okay, I can breathe for a little bit. So the 3 C's. I wanted to talk a little bit about this, but taking advantage of the 13 minutes I just got, I want to pause for a second here and see is there any question, because I was really zooming through some of those slides, sharing some of those experiences. I want to take a few quick questions.
Could you just touch quickly on how you decided not to do the one-time trainings, like more of what your assessment tool was?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, that is a really good question. So, sorry, I didn't catch your name.
Mercedes, I use she, her pronouns.
So Mercedes has a really good question. So how did you decide when to kind of pass a one-time and when to go for a one-time? So that required a lot of strategizing. Like when we get one of those one-time requests, we talk to the person to see what their intention is or what are they trying to do. Usually I would have people say, oh, we wanted to do something around SAM, and then we would ask them, well, we try to we know that you're putting in a lot of resources into this training, and we want you to be successful, but we also know from research that, we all know one time is not going to do anything. So are you interested in having us back for maybe more than one, maybe perhaps 2 session or 3 session where we could do a good job and you would get what you're looking for? And at that point, we get enough response to decide if it's worth it or if it's not worth it. If people say, oh, that's all we could do, then we have to figure out if that's a good opportunity. If they say, no, that's a great idea, yes, let's do that. That's, again, tells us which direction to go. So what we try to do is during conversations, of course, we don't directly say no, but we also explain to them our goal and why we are here and what are we really trying to do, and they easily see that that doesn't match. We haven't had a lot of no's because people usually try to kind of get us those 2 or 3 sessions, but there has been time where this one person has, she always asks us to come back every SAM month. So one time we did it, we hoped that that would turn into a good outreach opportunity, but then we found out that she keeps us calling every year. So we had a conversation and we had to explain how, but we also got her in touch with other programs that were doing the work. So we just didn't say, no, good luck. We try to kind of problem solve and kind of pass them on to other programs that were doing that work. She's still getting what she needs, but from other sources.
What are the majority of places that you're running the program through? Is it faith-based, schools, nonprofits?
So that's a really good question. And your name is Shaina? Shana had a really good question, how are we running those programs? Where are we recruiting? Is that what you are asking? So in terms of recruitment, we use a whole host of strategies, and we have evolved. Trust me, we didn't do so great. So we were struggling to run programs at times, and Christina's going to talk about some branding we did, which was a big success. But we have partner agencies that we work with, so we did a lot of work to kind of get their interest. Some of it does not work out. So if you're trying to do that, don't be disheartened that if it's not working out, that's exactly what it's supposed to be. But then you would end up, even if you end up with 1 or 2 meaningful partners, worth it. I have, in my 4 years of this program, I have tried to outreach more than I would say between 20, 25 partners. I had some success, I had a good chunk of success, but with, I would say, about 10. And I had phenomenal success with 1 or 2. And those 2 programs that I had phenomenal success with kept coming back, and we are now working together to develop a program that's pretty strong, robust. We are doing a parents workshop group with them. So even if you get that one person, try to kind of make the most of it with that one person.
We have a question.
Yeah, one of the things that you said in a few slides ago was you mentioned non-traditional housing. So I'm guessing that's youth detention centers or something like that. Mm-hmm. And the question that I had was, how do you deal with that population being really transient with kids in and out and implementing something that's over 18 weeks?
Do you want to answer that question?
Yeah, so I can answer that. So in New York City, non-traditional housing to us is not emergency shelters, so they wouldn't be transient because they would have a place to stay over 6 months. Supportive housing, which is for youth who transition usually from foster care or shelters, and that's their permanent residence. Some permanent for life and some permanent until they're about 28. And then, what was my other one? Foster care. So people, youth who are in permanent foster care placement. Yeah.
And I wanted to add one more thing to the question Shayna asked and move on. Is that we also have a pretty robust database that we created with help from interns. We created this database which includes all the schools. We looked at neighborhood data at the beginning, and we know which schools serve the different communities that we want to work with. We have a list of schools with guidance counselor, parent coordinator, all of that stuff. So we did like robust mailing out there, and then people just respond. We just had to make it a little bit more attractive for people to respond. When we went out there and said we are doing DOT, nobody was interested because it meant nothing to nobody. So we had to do some branding, and Christina's going to talk about that. All right, I just realized I have like 6 or 7 minutes. I'll take a quick question and then we'll get back.
Stop me if you're going to answer this already. But I'm curious how you measure the impact of the social media campaign component as well as the impact of the adult and caregiver campaign component.
Okay, so we are going to talk about that at the evaluation section. So is it okay if I saved it? And if I forget, please bring it up again. So I wanted to go a little bit into the curriculum. Now I know both Mary and Christina told me, Shashri, don't try to kind of cram all that in. Nobody can read. It's hard, but I just could not forego that temptation. But I just wanted to give you a little bit of summary of what we did. We started with, this is an 18-week course. The first 8 to 10 week is the curriculum where we actually talk about a lot of different things, and I'm going to go into that. The next 4 to 6 week is community mobilization, and then the following 4 weeks is campaign. And remember when I said that we could also wrap it up by 14 weeks if we lost a lot of days for snow day or whatever reason? That's where we would merge a campaign and community mobilization together. So we would do the curriculum for 8 to 10, and then the campaign and the community mobilization parallelly. So just like an upshot of what this is, we do a bunch of exercise, but we start from like a broader lens of talking about, community leadership. What does that mean? And we start that conversation by doing an identity mapping. Now, many of these tools that you would probably hear us talk about is not rocket science. We did not invent them. It was out there in the world. We just made the best use of it. With the identity mapping, we identify race, gender, complexion, sexual orientation, all these different identities. And we have people kind of go through this exercise where they identify their visible and invisible identities, identities that they are proud of, identities that they like to hide, identities that helps them meet most people, connect with more people. And we use all of that information into a conversation around, as a community leader, how could you think about your vulnerabilities and your strengths to decide and choose whether or not to have these conversations? How do you use that as a leverage point to have these tough conversations with people? If there's an identity that helps you connect easily with people, could that be a point of interface when you're out in the community and trying to be a mobilizer or a catalyst? So we kind of have those conversations be framed in a way that's most meaningful. What we also do is once they had that conversation, we have them identify a community leader and have them identify like an activity or a task that made them a leader, or like a social change type stuff they had done. And what is great is that as part of that exercise, we have them identify the event or the component that made them a leader, but we also have them identify what leadership skill did they really appreciate about this person. Now, a couple years back, I'm talking about, so where did I get that idea? So a couple years back, I went to a leadership training, and one of the things they had us do, and I'm sure many of you are familiar, is they would have you talk about, like, who are those 1 or 2 leaders that inspire you, and what about them inspire you, and what which of those qualities do you see in yourself or you want to build? And I thought that was such a great exercise because it really helped me identify those people, but also identify what I most appreciate in other leaders and what do I want to build in myself. So we do a similar type of exercise, and we have them identify social leaders, change makers, and what would they bring to the table, and and then bring that conversation to a point where we kind of ask them to think about how can you now use your leadership skills, the one that you just identified, to make some of those changes, to be able to talk to people about such a difficult topic. Like what within your frame of leadership skills or attributes would make it easier for you. So somebody might be like, oh, I'm an extrovert, I have no problem talking to people. So then we would try to figure out how could you use that to engage more people. If you have somebody who says, I'm not a people person, but I am a good thinker, then really thinking about how could you use that to strategize. So really identifying your individual skills as a young person and thinking about what about that would contribute to this work. And this is all skills building at the beginning. After which we kind of go into a lot of exercise around healthy relationship, consent, and bystander. And remember that exercise I was talking about where they kind of look at media, parents, and peers? We actually have them look at media to see what's out there. This is what's out there. And we all know that, right? And we have them do reaction to these. Like, what do you think? How would you react to it? So young people actually react to some of this and say what they think. And I want to wait for the next one. There's one more. But before that, could you all read the one from Happy Women's Day from Big? Look like a girl, act like a lady, think like a man, work like a boss. In some of our groups, we spend time talking about Women's Day and what does that mean for those social messages. And we talk about some of those within the context of gender roles, sexuality, sexual roles, relationship, and how does that all kind of come together. So we use a lot of this type of stuff to talk about some of these things. This one's my favorite. Believe it or not, when I saw somebody bring this up, I'm like, oh my God, I'm not as old as I think. Because I heard this music when I was growing up. And we have had young people who brought it up. It's Love the Way You Lie from Eminem and Rihanna. And the text, there's a lot of physical violence that's in that song. And the young person, like the one that's next to it, the text is about, it came from a young person who said, it's not a WrestleMania. You can probably think you can be in a relationship like Mayweather. You know, Floyd Mayweather is the professional boxer. So this really helps them kind of think about gender, some of those norms, healthy relationship, unhealthy relationship in the most fun way that they're not like sitting through trainings. Now, the other component is the community mobilization, and we have some instruction around community mobilization in the sense that we are very clear to us in terms of what we want and to young people around what we want from them. We separate community mobilization into two things, one for peers and one for adults. We don't ask them to do a lot of work with the peers because they're doing the campaign, but with the adults, we have a set of things that they can pick from. And they have target in terms of the number of people they need to recruit, the number of activities they have to do. And that comes from me kind of being jaded by the fact that sometimes we call it community mobilization, and all we have seen people do is go out and do a clothesline, done, out. 200 people saw it, but nobody's thinking beyond that fun little activity. So we wanted to be as thorough as possible with what we have. So we did a radio show with, this was with the Haitian community where young people did a radio show for adults, and they actually called in with a lot of adult type questions, like, oh, why are you dating? Like, why are you even talking about this when you should be out like studying or whatever? Like, do you really need to have sex at this point? And our young people who went through the program answered all of those questions. There's a lot of interesting questions. I could just not share it because of time. We also did a focus group with parents to kind of understand what tools are out there that parents can use. Because something we have seen is that oftentimes when we bring up the topic of engaging parents, which our youth said we needed to do beyond campaign, like we had to engage our parents, we saw two types of reaction. One from young people, one from parents. So from young people, when we asked, oh, what would it be if your parents talked to you about some of these stuff? They were like, ew. Like, for real now? I would not have my mom come in and talk to me about sex and dating. And then there was the other crowd, which is the parents who always get blamed that they're not talking, but not really thinking, why is it that parents are not talking? Did they get that conversation when they were growing up? They have a ton of stuff. Many of these parents are dealing with a whole lot in their lives. In this political climate, or even before, there's immigration, poverty, putting, food on the table. So really thinking about their priorities and being willing to kind of see what would be most helpful. So we are now working with a group of young people to provide parents with some tools. The young people did a focus group with their peers to see what type of tools, what would they like their parents to talk about, and then did another focus group with parents to see what tools would they need to have those conversations. And they're now working on that stuff. And the thing that I want to touch and then pass on to Mary, yes, I know, is the campaign. It's 1 to 2 weeks, and we kind of went through a lot of hashtag, from not having a hashtag to a lot of hashtags. We had Slur the Blur. We had hashtag Make It Known. We had Let's Talk Sex, and then we landed with Everybody Told Me and Nobody Told Me. And that became the most popular. So young people creates those messages, community artists creates artwork, and we put it together. And believe it or not, they do some pretty good job, but I'm not going to do a spoiler here. So we do that, and then they create a lot of supplemental materials, like videos and stuff that goes with it. So I'm going to pass it on to Mary.
Good job, Shashwati. You can tell how much thought has gone into this program. I noticed that our sign-up sheet is getting all filled up. Are there several sign-up sheets or just one that's going around for us? There's two? Okay, because the one that's at this table is really full. Yeah, if somebody needs our sign-up sheet, please raise your hand and we'll pass it to the next table. So I'm going to talk, we're going to start to talk a little bit about the challenges that we've faced. Let me just clarify a couple things about, people asked about whether we work mainly with not-for-profits or schools. We have not gone to New York City Department of Education yet. That is a whole nother sort of probably 3-year project at the minimum. What we have been trying to do is target after-school programs, and often culturally specific programs in New York City do run either programs for youth or after-school programs for youth. And so we have, when Shashwati talked about our partnerships, we have really struggled with what we are going to ask our partner organization. Are we going to ask them to host it? Are we going to ask them, in the beginning we wanted them to host it, to co-facilitate it, and to recruit the youth. And that was adding a lot of work to that partner organization's already hefty load of work. And so we've had to modify that over time, and we can answer some questions about that. We did it with the motivation of really wanting to co-facilitate and co-run these groups with culturally sensitive groups that already exist and are doing work with youth in New York City. So I'm just going to do a tiny piece about media. So just to be clear about our campaigns are all social media driven. We were going to do, like, we had aspirations of doing subway posters and all kinds of things. We haven't gotten there yet. It's all social media driven, and it's all driven by our kids. And so our first impulse, of course, when you're doing a media campaign, is to call in a media company. Dun, 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 right? They come in on white horses, and they come and they design some stuff for you. After spending a long time with them, talking to them about the groups, bringing them to the groups to meet the youth, and this is what they came up with. We didn't like it. The kids didn't like it. We just were floored. I mean, really, we worked with this media company for 6 or 8 months, and this is what they gave us. So let me just click on. Sorry. So we didn't like what the first media group gave us, so we went to another media group. And this is what they gave us. And they're not bad, they're not horrible, but they really didn't inspire our youth, and it's really just a reworking of song lyrics that is not terribly creative, right? So we are going to put this task to you now, and I'm going to turn it over to Christina, and she's going to have you get creative with your own hashtags and your own ideas.
Yeah, so once those 2 media companies failed, it was up to the youth to come up with their own social media campaign, and so they came up with hashtag everybody told me, ... but no, hashtag nobody told me. So I want to give you all a chance, before I show you the beautiful work they came up with, for you all to create a hashtag about healthy relationships. So this side of the room will be healthy relationships, the middle will be consent, and that side will be bystander engagement. So for an example, hashtag everybody told me that sex is the way, but hashtag nobody told me that communicating with my partner about their comfort level is the greatest play. Consent, hashtag everybody told me sex should flow, but hashtag nobody told me that I'm allowed to say no. And bystander engagement, hashtag everybody told me it's not my problem to solve, but nobody told me it's okay to get involved. So it should try to rhyme, it should be short and sweet. Literally think about things that parents, friends, teachers told you, and come up with what they should have really told you, or what you wish they would have told you. Okay, so come up with as many as you can per table, choose the best one, and I'll ask you to share it. All right, so I'll give you 3 minutes. So you're creating a tag. So this side of the room is doing healthy relationships. You have to start with everybody told me, ... a phrase, but then nobody told me. The middle is consent, and then the right side of the room is bystander engagement. And if you have any questions, Shashti, Mary, and I will help you. Okay. Let's see what you all came up with. Anybody want to go first? Anybody feel? Oh, okay.
Healthy relationship?
All right. Hashtag everybody told me I had to be in a relationship. Hashtag nobody told me how to do it.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
That's great.
Let's just go down and do all of healthy relationships.
All right. A healthy relationship?
Everybody told me to look for a man. Nobody told me I'm enough as I am.
Ooh.
Wow.
I'm going to collect the Post-its at the end. Because I like them.
Everybody told me to look for a man. Nobody told me I'm enough as I am.
Okay. Everybody told me my vagina needed saving. Nobody told me it'd be my feel-good haven.
That's really good. Okay. Consent?
Consent? Who wants to start? Consent? Oh, okay.
Everybody told me sex was about me. Nobody told me consent was the key.
Okay. The next table, please.
Everybody told me silence meant yes. Nobody told me asking was best.
Everybody told me to tap that ass. Nobody told me I should ask.
Nice.
That is something the youth would come up with. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, bystander.
Everybody told me to go along with the silence. Hashtag nobody told me that doing so would mean violence.
Everybody told me it's the victim's fault, but nobody told me I could stop the assault.
That's a good one. One more. Do you like both?
We had several.
Can you choose one that you were like, I love it?
Well, no, because we didn't talk about them all.
Uh-huh.
Okay, everybody told me it wouldn't happen to you. No one told me that was not true.
Okay, yeah. Thank you all. So this is a fraction of how many the youth would come up with, and we would choose the best, and we would make it into our social media campaign that we, as a requirement of our program, that they would share. They would tag influencers from their community. They would tag their friends. They would make reaction videos to it. So this is one. Everybody told me to use a rubber, but nobody told me to check in with my lover. Everybody told me to mind my business, but nobody told me that I can be a supportive witness. Everybody told me my partner being possessive of me is cute, but nobody told me that's the sign to grab the nearest parachute. And everybody told me to use protection, but nobody told me to respect rejection. Yeah. So our youth came up with all of these. They work in groups. They once they get it, they're like, oh, I know what I want to say next. One of my favorite ones, actually, it's more around sex ed. So we used it because I loved it so much. But it was hashtag everybody told me to cover up my titty, but hashtag nobody told me all about my kitty, right? It's my favorite one. It's the one I always remember because I loved it so, so much. And then we work with community artists. This is one who's a comic designer, excuse me, because I don't know the terminology. And they take their hashtags there and they made it into a comic. And we take the worksheets that they do, we ask them what love is and what love is not, and we take their words and we make it part of our social media campaign as well. We ask them to come up with things that they heard that are true, things that they heard that are false. So we take every little piece of information, worksheets, when we do poster boards, and we make it part of our campaign. And sometimes they say, oh, I went home after our program and I made this. So this is one of the things that they've made. And then the one on the right is from our most recent Southeast East Asian group, and we worked with a community artist who made that artwork to go with that campaign. So challenges. There are a lot of, you have a question? No? Okay. If you have a question, just let us know. So there are a lot of challenges with doing community mobilization, especially for youth in underserved communities. Mary's gonna talk more about the EB, the evidence-based mandates, and how there aren't any EBIs for mobilization, community mobilization programs, but recruitment, right? There are a lot of programs that want youth to participate. So recruitment is a lot of work. It takes months to get them in the door, and then to keep them committed and just keep them accountable for what they agree to do for these 18 weeks. And managing mixed age groups. We work with 13 through 21. My last group was 13 through 18, and even that, it's a smaller range, but it makes a big difference when you have 13 middle schoolers who may not have as much sex ed education, and then you have 17 18-year-olds who may be sexually active. And we're teaching them about healthy relationships, and you have some 13-year-old who maybe has never even been in a relationship. You have an 18-year-old who's sexually active. So managing those mixed groups without it seeming like, oh, well, that's just a kid, so I can't say what I want to say in this group because I don't want to, offend this little kid. And then community expertise. It's really, really important that we work with a community partner, because as I co-facilitated the Southeast Asian group, and I'm a Black woman, and they would say things, even simple things. They're talking about a food that I have no clue about. So then I have to learn to say, oh, well, tell me about it. Like, give them the space to educate me on something that's not part of my culture. So, what works? So we've learned youth are experts, and we have to give them the credit and the space to allow them to be experts in their own community. It's collaborative, we make that very clear, and we're co-learning. Accountability. So I'm very big on accountability and making it clear that we're in this together. You decided to do this program, and so I created a point system for the youth, because we also learned that some youth found it unfair that when they received their stipend, everybody received the same amount when they were there for the full 18 weeks, and somebody there was there for 12 or for 13. So the point system gives a point for every activity that you do, and then your stipend is based off a staggering system. So it's fair for everybody. You come for 2 hours, you get 2 points. You're an hour late, you get 1 point. So then that will contribute to how your stipend works. Community partners, we talked a lot about how they help us with recruitment, co-facilitation. They're there to be a person that's part of that community that we may not be a part of. They give us feedback, a lot of feedback and assessment, and it's part of building a relationship. And also community partners could benefit. Sometimes they have to do youth programs, and so by working with us, they fulfill their requirement and we fulfill our requirement. Branding. So in winter, just February 2018, we decided to rebrand Project DOT as a civic leadership internship. One, because we didn't have a community partner at that time, so they couldn't help us with recruitment. And so that allowed us to reach out to schools, other community-based organizations to say, we're doing this internship, please have your youth apply. And we received over 40 applications and chose 12 from that, and we had a great solid group. And then we had an advanced civic leadership from a past community partner, and we chose 4 to 5 Black youth to do more advanced leadership, and they were the ones who conducted the focus groups, and they were the ones who conducted the peer and adult focus groups. And I mean, they wrote the questions, so they learned research skills that I didn't learn until I was in grad school. And they asked questions that we wouldn't think to ask. So for example, the parents were asked, would you feel comfortable talking to your kids about sex and healthy relationships? They're like, yeah, of course we would do it. So one of the youth said, oh yeah? So you'll feel fine talking to them about anal and anal beads and oral sex and all these other things? And they were like, no, absolutely not. I'm not talking to my kids about any of that. And it's like, okay, so they're fine talking to them about the vanilla stuff, right? But if your child had other questions, or if they were curious about being LGBTQ or doing things that maybe their parent wouldn't agree with, parents realized they weren't as comfortable as they claimed they were. And then incentives. So we give a stipend. We give them Metro cards because we're in New York. We give them certificates, and we give them food. Food is mandatory for them. And the stipend, of course, depends on your youth, your location, what they would be willing to accept. We learned that our youth wouldn't show up unless they got a little bit of money. So that's what we had to do. Any questions? How much do they get? So it depends. So a regular semester. Oh, sorry. How much money do they get? So, yeah. Our youth in the fall and in spring semester get $200. So that's the max you can get. And then depending on your commitment, then it would be staggered amount.
And it used to be 100, and then we kind of, when we did not get anybody, we did a quick like focus group, as in like getting young people that were still showing up and asking like, what would it take to bring people back? And they said, more money.
Yeah, so our median age is about 16 through 17. So most groups are 13 through 17, 18. The oldest group is the advanced group because they already went through Project DOT. So they're 18 through 21, and they came back because they really loved it. And they now are creating a parent engagement program. So their first one will be in a few weeks, and they're gonna go out there. And they created a full 4-hour program, and they're gonna engage parents in the conversation about healthy relationships, consent, and how to talk to their youth. So it's 13 to 21, but the max we get, yeah.
And
what do I think keeps the older kids coming back? We have a strong community partner, so they are part of our community partners organization, so that keeps them coming back. And they really like the work. This is what they want to do, whether like one of our youth wants to be a social worker, one of our youth wants to write a play about sexual violence. One of our youth, she's 16, she's in the older group, but she's already taking college classes and she knows she wants to be a lawyer. So I think it's just having the passion that they want to do it, and then this opportunity just popped up and they get to keep doing it over and over.
My question is about the healthy relationships language and sort of framing around where you're trying to go and assets, and how did you come up with that versus, like, did you talk about things like, I don't know what words would resonate with youth, but like sexual respect, or sort of thinking about healthy sexuality outside the context of a relationship?
So how do we choose healthy relationships versus sexual respect? What type of language we use when we're talking about healthy relationships? Since you started.
So what we did is that when we wanted to be focused around what topics we wanted to address. And when we started working with young people, like you raised this question, we came up with a lot of different things that young people wanted to look at, things at the intersection of talking about healthy relationship. So there were things around sex ed, there were things about pregnancy, a whole bunch of things came up, and it's organic for that stuff to come up. It was a very difficult, it was difficult for us to kind of bulldoze still in the direction we wanted to go. So what we decided is when things came up that were a little bit on the, on the other topics, we wanted to kind of provide them with the resources, but we wanted to be very, very focused around healthy relationship and what that meant so that young people could start understanding what it is. And then as they're thinking about the other topics, they can kind of see how that connects. Is that what you were asking? I just wanted to make sure I got your question right. Oh, okay, sorry, so I totally misunderstood you. Right. So we look at, when we talk about healthy relationship, we also consider hookup as relationship. Even if it's for 2 hours, it's a relationship with another person. So within the larger framework of healthy relationship, we are thinking, we look at partner relationship, we look at hookup, we look at even if it's just a quick, encounter or like an interaction, we look at all of that stuff. But in terms of the language, I'm not sure I'm catching your question right, which is why I might be kind of around the periphery. When young people comes up with the language, we kind of look through all of the messages that come in and really trying to drill down and ask, because we got a lot of, this round, we got a lot of messages that were like sex ed type. So even though they were great, we had to make some conscious decision to kind of be focused. So it was tough. And some of these conversations, like what the reason probably I'm struggling a little bit to answer this question is because we struggle a lot when those come up and around language, because on one end, you're also shutting, in a way, some of the conversations that are coming up, because even though you say that there are these other agencies that are having those conversations, in the moment, you kind of shut down somebody's curiosity to pursue another conversation that they're interested in. And we are very cognizant of that. So we kind of struggle with that when that comes up, because I know this time around, Christina, that came up with one of our groups, right?
Yeah, and working with 13-year-olds, you tend to forget that the relationships last a moment, whether that's a school day, a class period. So those things do come up, their relationship, their boyfriend, girlfriend, and they're really referring to them as that, but they're their friend. So we do talk about friendships and relationships with family, and it also depends on the group and how open they are to go as deep as that. The Southeast East Asian group, they talked a lot about family pressures and friendships and how that is part of their healthy relationships and whether or not those relationships are actually healthy. So we go into it as romantic relationships, but friendships and family, they do come up a lot, yeah. About pleasure? No, not specific. Oh, sorry. Are there any discussions about pleasure in our curriculum? No.
And sometimes things come up. When they come up, we try to address it at the moment. But also, depending on what the topic is, sometimes we are not able to pursue it in a way we would ideally like to. And one of our biggest struggle is that we cannot, because on one hand, we want to make sure that we are on a tight timeline, the 18 weeks after which young people, and again, some of these decisions we took were with young people. We asked them, look, these are some of the topics that are coming up. We have two options. One, we pursue some of them and engage in this conversation, which means the program is going to go beyond 18 weeks because we also have to talk to you about the things that we wanted to discuss with you. Do you want to stay longer, or do you want to kind of figure out other ways to connect with the advocate or other avenues? So we really did, like, anytime we don't know an answer, we can't decide on anything, we really went and asked young people, and they would tell us what would make most sense. Also the person who raised some of those questions.
Yeah, and I mean, we do end up filling in the gap that the schools don't about sex ed. Like, I get a lot of sex ed questions. Like, the youth would ask me, one of the 13-year-old youth asked me what an abortion was, right? So, unfortunately, because they have that gap, and outside of the 2 hours, I've stayed and had 2-hour-long conversations with youth. It's unfortunate that we have to fill that gap because the education system should be doing that, but they're not. But you also have to be willing to make that time for them too. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we have about 10 or 12 minutes. And this is the other side of trying to pack in 4 years of work into an hour and a half. And I'm sure many of you would have questions or have questions, things that you want to ask that we may not have time to address. So we are going to leave our business cards at that table. Pick a card, and if you have questions that you thought we did not have chance to cover or ask or pause, we know we were rushing through a lot of content. Please reach out to us and we'd be more than happy. Just know that every step of the way in these 4 years that we have done the program, every little decision that we have taken or whatever we are doing it for a reason, from stipend to how much it is, the point system, like what topics are we discussing, everything has a reason, and many of those reasons are informed by our young people. Because as funny as it may sound, sometimes as adults we are clueless and we just hate to own that up. And we were clueless at many points. So I just want to talk quickly about evaluation. There might be more questions. Please reach out to me if you have more questions. We operated with very little resource on evaluation, so we wanted to wait till we got to that point where we were pretty sure this is what we were doing. So this is just presenting a snapshot. Our social media campaign was pretty wide-reaching, and we did it with minimal resource. I was surprised when I learned the power of social media. We reached about 350 people. in just thank you. I was clearly understating that. 350,000 people in the 3 iterations of campaign we did, and that was done in 2 different ways, earned and paid. So earned media did not get us as many. Of course, it did not get us 350, but we set target for our youth to say how many people they have to tag. And before they pick up their gift cards, they have to actually show us proof of how many. We make it very clear, like it's, the basis of some of these conversations is we treat you as adult. When you show up to your work, you know, your company, your agency has certain expectations of you, right? Could you, if you had a deliverable and you just, you know, snuck out and did not do it, people are going to hold you accountable. These are young people, and they're leaders. They're professionals. And one of the things we wanted to make sure is that we respected that in that way. We really dealt with them as an adult, and not as young people, and not minimize that agency in them. So we were very clear about what we did and why we did it. So this is the impact we had. We used a lot of websites. We used Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Snapchat. Snapchat was not great, so we dropped it the second iteration. And we used Hootsuite to kind of gather data. Facebook also had some of those data. Also, one of the major impact that I want to underscore is we got a lot of media attention after doing the work, and we usually have our young people talk to the media. So we are starting up a media like bureau for youth that would be trained. So they've done a ton of work, and the packet that we're going to send out has some of that information. This is from the data that we have collected. We do pre-post test and some satisfaction survey, and we gathered that data. I'm kind of going through it quickly because we do not have much time. So this is another slide which is just meant for quick consumption. So for many of our programs, we all do pre-post test. We try to gather information about demographic, but what we wanted to do is see what questions did we absolutely wanted to ask, and we kind of divided it by process and outcome. For the process, we wanted to see retention. So on day 1, I had 12 people show up. And on the last day of my training, if 2 people are showing up, that says something about retention, right? Who are we reaching? What are the demographic there? Also, we wanted to ask about some satisfaction questions to see what's going on. How did they like it? What did they not like it? And with every iteration, we changed that. Same with the community mobilization, we asked similar question, and with campaign, we try to see the reach. For all of these questions, we use basic information. We have our logs, we have pre-post test, we did demographic type, and we did our sign-in sheet. So it's not something we created. Now, what we decided to do next, this is where it took us a lot of time to figure this out. We struggled a lot figuring out some of the tools, but then we decided to engage a grad student who helped us with evaluation. And then she came in and said that, look, you don't need to invent tools. They're out there in the world. You just need to get the data using those tools. So we use validated tools. This is from the Wisconsin Coalition Against Sexual Assault. We use these tools to collect data and really inform our pre-post test. And that's most of it. If you're interested in talking more about this or learning more how we did it, I know I'm kind of zooming through things fast, please reach out to us and I'll be happy to talk more about how we got there, how we created resources like our finance people to help create Excel sheet for us. They always work with Excel. They could create an Excel that would help us kind of, do something that we would just enter the data and it'll pop up the messages or pop up the numbers for us. So we did a lot of little things here and there to kind of help kind of staff a very under-resourced program. I want to turn it to Mary and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah. Uh-oh, I have 4 minutes left. Okay, I'm going to speed through. So how many of you are being asked to use evidence-based curricula in your, oh my, a lot. So are we. And so we've embarked on a sort of a a self-imposed study group to understand this more. But we also did, from the beginning, enlist a researcher with whom we've worked for many years. Her name is Dr. Victoria Fry. She's a close collaborator of ours. And I also started working with Victoria. We're proud to say we're working with Victoria Banyard, who is one of the creators of Bring in the Bystander at University of New Hampshire. And she was really interested in taking Bring in the Bystander into diverse communities, and is very interested in the work that we've been doing. So Dr. Fry has been with our project for the entire time, and she's been giving us advice and articles and things so that we could understand more what evidence-based means. Unfortunately, I'm not a researcher, and I'm not going to pretend to be a researcher. My background is I'm a trained attorney. But I have been interested in research for a long time, and have learned some of the language, but I certainly don't have the skills. But what I do understand is that the curricula that are out there for youth do not have evidence-based community mobilization components to them. They don't take a participant in the program from understanding sexual assault and sexual assault, the way their sexual assault affects their community and them, to the socio ecological level of community-based mobilization. None of the evidence-based curricula do that. So we really wanted to push the envelope in terms of that, and really look at how we could do that more effectively. We also know that there really aren't very many curricula out there that are sensitive to cultural and urban environments. And so we were disturbed with with thinking about using a curricula that was not sensitive to that. And we also are aware, and I have 2 sites down here, 2 articles that have been super helpful to us that have been written in the last 4 or 5 years, that conducted meta-analysis of prevention programs, sexual violence prevention programs. And we know from those articles that most of the programs that are examined don't have enough evidence enough data and enough evidence to assess effectiveness. For example, Degou's article, Sarah Degou, 2/3 of the programs that she assessed were one-session programs, and we know from the research that those aren't effective. And many do not assess violent behavior. They assess rather skills and knowledge, or knowledge background. So I'm going to just speed through this last slide before we end. We still find the 9 principles of prevention to be extremely helpful in our work, and we have tried to tailor our work around these principles. And so I think that a lot of them you are familiar with. Perhaps comprehensiveness is one of the more interesting ones. It does not necessarily mean that it means tackling issues from many different perspectives. And so many programs start with like informing youth about statistics about sexual violence or the law about sexual violence. We had to ask ourselves, what does that have to do with preventing violence? Does it prevent violence? Is there a causal relationship between presenting that information and the behavior that somebody's going to, the behavior that somebody's going to go out and conduct after the group? And we think it probably doesn't. And that's why we picked those core messages that Shashwati was referring to of consent, bystander, and healthy relationships. So the other things I think are pretty self-explanatory, except for maybe theory-driven. 0 minutes, okay. What's that? Oh, okay, we're over. Okay, so I guess what we'll do is we'll stop here. We'll thank you for participating in the workshop, and this is our contact information. And for those of you who signed up, we will put together a package of information for you that we will be sending out. We would love for you to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. If you would, that would be great. And you will see some of the messaging from the kids. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this Prevent Connect podcast. Prevent Connect is a project of the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault, with funding from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The views presented on Prevent Connect are not necessarily the views of the United States government, the CDC, or CalCASA. To learn more about Prevent Connect, visit www.preventconnect.org. For more information about CalCASA's mission, or to show your support, visit calcasa.org. That's CALCASA.org.